Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and welcome back to another Final Fantasy XIV job retrospect video. For Realm Reborn's 10th anniversary, we've been looking back at all the iterations of the existing jobs, at least the ones that have been around for the majority of that last decade. This video, we're going to be taking a look at Thaumaturge and Black Mage, and honestly, it's one of the jobs I'm most curious to look back at. Because when I think of Black Mage, I think of a job that's just kind of had a natural evolution from expansion to expansion, and so kind of remembering how, I guess, natural that was, I just wonder how long the video will even be. But there are a lot of little things that have happened, potency changes, and even just core game mechanics that have been fine-tuned to make the job the kind of perfect caster that it is today, at least in my eyes. So without further ado, I say we get started. All right, so here we go, the Thaumaturge, A Realm Reborn wiki page. We use something called the Wayback Machine in order to take a look at these older archived web pages. And thankfully, the Console Gamers wiki does have these old pages on hand, but I don't know, it's just kind of nostalgic. You know, it has that kind of early Final Fantasy XIV vibe, even like, you know, more classic MMO vibe looking kind of wiki. But before we can even talk about Black Mage, we do need to start with Thaumaturge, because you needed level 30 Thaumaturge in order to get Black Mage. They still technically need that today, but we also needed level 15 Archer. Very weird thing to need, but fortunately Archer's cross-class skills made that a pretty good secondary choice. They could have gone a couple other directions with it, but I'm kind of glad they went with Archer back in the day. Now, one of my favorite things about Thaumaturge, even to this day, is the fact that within the first 2 spells you learn, you are introduced to the, I'd say, the primary game mechanic for the job. Yeah, we kind of take it for granted nowadays because it's just kind of a thing that happens and gets managed, but they are still core, and they've just been around for such a long time. They've just been refined and tuned. Now, with Blizzard and Fire, you can see they deal ice damage or fire damage with a potency of 150. The Blizzard having the heavy effect is something I remember being very popular. It's one of the reasons why ice mages were really popular for overworld leveling, because people would use that heavy effect in order to make sure they didn't get hit by monsters, but not a good thing. You didn't want to be an ice mage, but that definitely didn't help when people got really used to casting Blizzard 1 in the overworld. However, the big thing is Umbral Ice and Astral Fire. These are 2 phases that you basically swap between as a Black Mage, with Astral Fire being your big damage phase and Umbral Ice being your MP recovery phase. Basically, during Astral Fire, your fire spells, they deal more damage, they cost more MP, and your MP regeneration completely halts. So once you lock in Fire phase, you have to spend all of your MP before you leave it. Now, by casting an Ice spell, you would leave Astral Fire and then go into Umbral Ice. And Umbral Ice was just about regenerating MP very, very quickly. It would also reduce the cast time and the MP cost of fire spells, so it was really quick to go back into fire. But that's the idea. Dump a ton of damage in fire, go over to Blizzard, get some MP back, you know, cast a thunder spell, which was another thing they have to manage, or is another thing they have to manage. And that was just kind of the simplicity of it. You didn't want to drop Astral Fire, you didn't want to drop Umbral Ice, and that's just kind of what you focused around. Now, at the early levels, you only have 1 stack of Astral Fire and Umbral Ice, so you don't really cast a lot of spells in order to generate more stacks. And then at later levels, you get more stacks, and that is very, very important to the way that the job plays. But another thing that had a lot of people misplaying Thaumaturge at the early levels is those 2 spells and then Transpose. So Transpose at level 4 just lets you swap between Astral Fire and Umbral Ice, but only getting a single stack of the opposite one. So this is how players early on the class get used to using their, or interacting with their fire and ice spells. Because when you cast Blizzard, it gets rid of fire. It doesn't just send you into Umbral Ice. You would need to cast another one. So instead, people would spend all their MP, transpose, you know, regenerate MP while casting Blizzard, transpose, and that's just how the early game would go. But when we get into the level 30 range, that's where it's supposed to change, and a lot of players didn't pick that up. Now, Thunder's a dot that you just have to manage. You want it on the enemy at all times, because at the later levels, it will proc a certain effect that is pretty important towards more damage. Now, Surecast and Sleep, next 2 skills. Funny thing with Sleep, it's actually supposed to be used for one of their class quests in order to make it a lot easier, because you're going to be up against multiple enemies at once, and Black Mage doesn't really have great options for that. Thaumaturge does, because you can still take Conjurer skills, and that's definitely what I did way back when. But you can like put one target to sleep while you kill the other target. I used to actually just sleep all the targets and run to the end. I think I still do that when I occasionally do the lower level quests nowadays. But Surecast's next spell is Cast Without Interruption. It was pretty useless in the early days, because yeah, it was nice when you were out soloing and you were leveling and you didn't want to get interrupted, but it's still just it wasn't that good compared to, well, just not being the target and just casting. Then you get Blizzard 2, your first AoE spell at level 12, and one of the lowest level AoE abilities you could get. And still, I think I'd have to look at the current jobs and remember them all like side by side, but I still think it is that we do have pretty early level AoE on Black Mage even now. We'll see by the end of this video what their lowest level AoE is, but I think it's still around this point. It's just an AoE ice effect around the player, and man, going into dungeons and just seeing people stand in the middle of a pack and spam Blizzard 2. I mean, it was what it was, and honestly, that was a little bit too good for quite some time, even going into the later expansions. And I say good, it was really more so the only option people would tolerate for quite some time. It also did a bind effect on all the enemies nearby, and that was something that was pretty nice again for the overworld. People would do that where with kiting, they'd like Blizzard until something was up in their face, then they'd Blizzard 2, then they'd back off and Blizzard again. People just really wanted to be ice mages, man. Blizzard 2 also not requiring a target was something fairly interesting. We had a situation in turn 5 where the boss didn't load. Like somebody was just like, it came back from a phase and the boss wasn't there. So the Black Mage just stood in the middle of the room and spammed Blizzard 2 to still do TPS. Not something you were supposed to use it for, but hey, it worked in that particular situation. Then you have Scathe. Honestly, it seems like a tool that's supposed to be like, oh, I need to move and I don't want to not cast a spell. But even back then, Scathe was kind of a meme. It's just an instant cast ability. It doesn't interact with Astral Fire or Umbral Ice in any way. Thus, if you had to use it, it wasn't considered a good thing. And to this day, it's still kind of in that exact same spot. I mean, they changed the effect and they changed the value of the potency, but it's still to this day, like if you have to use Scathe, something has gone horribly wrong. Back then, you didn't have nearly as many tools, so you saw it a little bit more, but it had to be done like so specifically. Otherwise, it was just a disaster through and through. Then you have Fire 2, which was a targeted AoE, and this, of course, was supposed to be your higher damage AoE. At the early levels with Astral Fire 2, you burn through your MP so quick that a lot of the times people were just annoyed to use it because they do a couple of Fire 2s and then have to swap, and then in order to use Blizzard 2, they'd have to make sure they were standing in range of all the enemies, so most people just opted to spamming Blizzard 2. I mean, they're both 100 potency, so people just decided they didn't care about the Astral Fire damage increase and said, I'll just Blizzard 2. And again, a lot of these early Thaumaturge skills just build kind of bad habits for players, I think. Now, Thunder 1 would become Thunder 2 at this level. Funny thing, though, about Thunder 2, and I actually have to make sure that that's an actual upgrade. I remember in the beta tests for Realm Reborn, Thunder 1 and Thunder 2 were actually two different spells with two different effects. So you could actually stack them both, which meant in theory you could have done the same with Thunder 3, which meant you could have just managed all three Thunder spells on top of Fire, and it wouldn't have been good if it had made it to that point. But I'm fairly certain Thunder 1 becomes Thunder 2. In fact, we can scroll down here and double check. In fact, it does not. So maybe what I'm remembering wasn't actually something that waited until I think maybe you just decided, you know what, I think they might have made it so that it overwrites it, because I'm noticing that the potency is actually the same. Is the dot okay, actually no, the dot potency is the same on all of them, so it's just the base potency that seems to be going up with each of them 30 to 50 to 60, and obviously when we get to talking about one of their other passives, that base potency does in fact play a role. But man, I remember that being a possibility that we had considered for Black Mage, that they could just be a Thunder Mage. Man, that would have been interesting to say the least. Swiftcast, still one of the most important abilities to this day. Used to come from Thaumaturge. If other classes wanted to use it, they needed to make sure they had Thaumaturge as one of their subclasses, and then they would need it at level 26. Next spell is cast immediately. 3-minute cooldown back then. Yikes. It's only a minute now. But, you know, it didn't make it any less useful. Just meant that you were using it. It was costly. Mana Ward, also an interesting one. So it creates a barrier that nullifies magic damage totaling up to 30% of maximum HP for 20 seconds. Now that definitely gets changed before the end of a Realm Reborn, because I remember, oh no, wait, there's Mana Ward and Mana Wall. See, I'm forgetting some things. I'm starting to remember them now. Yeah, just an HP barrier. I mean, that's not unfamiliar to Black Mages nowadays. It's, you know, very useful to have a max HP shield, and people appreciated it on Black Mage back then. Then you get to Fire 3. Now, level 34 is where the disasters began for your average Thaumaturges and Black Mages, because Fire 3 is unique from Fire 1 in a couple of ways. One, it does a lot more potency, and two, it costs a lot more MP. So what would happen is players would get Fire 3 and be like, oh, I'll spam Fire 3. And then when I'm out of MP, I'll transpose and I'll cast Blizzard and blah, 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 because that's what they had been doing all those levels. But Fire 3 was actually not meant for that. It grants you Astral Fire 3 immediately. So now you have all 3 stacks of Astral Fire and Umbral Ice. So the idea was you would only use Fire 3 and a few levels later Blizzard 3 to swap phases between Astral Fire and Umbral Ice, foregoing the transpose unless absolutely necessary to cover an emergency situation. But players didn't realize that. It wasn't intuitive. And when I say it wasn't, I mean like it still kind of happens to this day, I'm pretty sure. I haven't leveled with like a low-level Black Mage in quite some time, but I'd have to assume that stuff like this still happens to this day. But I gotta maybe remember, I haven't played Black Mage as much as I did at the end of Shadowbringers, so like the Endwalker changes are still kind of a little shaky, so this will be a good reminder for me. But the number of times I would go into like Cutter's Cry and see a Black Mage spam Fire 3, transpose, Blizzard 1, or then eventually, you know, Blizzard 3, transpose, Fire 3, and it was just a disaster. And a lot of the times you try to help people that were doing that, and they would just shrug you off, be like, you don't know what you're talking about, or I didn't ask for help. Oh man, I've tried to help so many Black Mages in that level range, and I'd say about 80 to 90% of them would fight me on the, hey, you know, just, you know, not trying to be rude, I just, you know, wanted to let you know this. It'd be like, I didn't ask. Leave me alone. It's just so common. It's just, I can't help but think about it. Lethargy, I forgot about this. Just literally slow and heavy for 12 seconds. Now the slow is interesting because on some enemies that's, you know, obviously going to reduce the amount of damage that they deal, the heavy being for kiting, but even still, it just that slow didn't really work on a lot of enemies. I think it probably worked on Ifrit hard mode, maybe it worked on like Garuda or something, but you didn't see that effect very often because most bosses were immune to that kind of stuff. And then Thunder 3, just the highest level Thunder Dot that you would get. And Ethereal Manipulation, an ability that's still around to this day, one that's not as important, but mastering the use of this skill was always something that had to be considered. Basically, it just rushes you to a target side. So it doesn't instantly teleport you. You kind of like just like fly in their direction, like chest out and everything. However, nowadays it's got a really short cooldown. I think it's like 10 seconds nowadays. It was a 3-minute cooldown. Imagine if Ethereal Manipulation was still 3 minutes. Oh my goodness. I mean, we have so much movement now on Black Mage that it doesn't really matter that much, but that's painful to think about. And yeah, Thaumaturge just, you know, a lot of this stuff is still familiar to this day, maybe a little less memey, and some of it definitely has some different effects, especially looking at the AoE, but overall, a lot of it's still familiar. Looking over at the traits, grants a 15% chance that upon use Surecast will have no recast time, which means you can Surecast twice in a row. So the ability that's already barely useful, 15% of the time, you get to use it a second time. Fantastic. There's the second stack of Astral Fire, Umbral Ice at level 20, and then at level 30, where is it? Level 30, level 40? There's level 40. There it is, at level 40. You get the third stack of Astral Fire and Umbral Ice. So you even have Fire 3 and Blizzard 3 like levels before you could even get the third stack. It's so weird. The enhanced Scathe, 20% chance it deals double damage. Oh boy, I sure do love going for that gamble. However, there are some traits here that were and still are very important to the job's function. At level 28, you have Thundercloud. So every time a Thunder Dot ticks, there's a 5% chance that it procs Thundercloud, and that allows you to instantly cast your next Thunder spell, deal all the damage that it would do over time up front as initial damage. It would cost no MP, and then of course it would reapply the dot. So the hope was that you would get enough Thundercloud procs to never have to hard cast Thunder again. It doesn't work out that way with a 1 in 20 proc chance, but very important ability, very strong burst, just very powerful in general, and something that you know, you would celebrate when you got a lot of them and be mad when you barely got any of them. Firestarter also something fairly similar, because you used Fire 3 to get into Fire Phase, but that meant that in the Fire Phase you were still spamming Fire 1. However, if you got a Firestarter proc, then you could replace a Fire 1 with Fire 3, because it would make Fire 3 require no MP, have no cast time. So it was just a flat gain, and on top of that, then you could stay in fire for longer, you could use the instant cast for movement, a lot of value in that individual skill. The only problem being that, you know, if you didn't get any again, it didn't feel good, and, you know, when you did get it, you had to make sure you used it well. But either way, there was just kind of the thing. Oh, you know what was a really bad thing about early Firestarter, and I think Firestarter remained this way for quite some time, but it didn't matter as much in Heavensward, is that So your procs in Final Fantasy XIV and A Realm Reborn, they were kind of tied to the animation of your skill a lot more. So Fire 1 has a travel time between when it leaves the Black Mage and hits the opponent, and all of its effects would not trigger until that moment when it actually hits and the damage number pops up. That included the application of Astral Fire, which could mean that even though you had like a second left and you finished the cast, that the travel time would make it so that it would wear off. But it would also mean that you couldn't realistically do a Fire 1 into a Fire 3, even if you got a Firestarter proc, because you should already be casting the next Fire 1 by the time the Fire 1 lands on the opponent. So what could happen is you'd get a Firestarter proc, but you're already mid-casting another Fire, and you're going to want to finish that. You don't want to just interrupt it to use the Firestarter. But then what if that one gives you a Firestarter, but you've just spent the Fire 3 and the Fire 3 didn't go off before you got the Firestarter. So now you just basically lose a stack for nothing because of the travel time applying to the applications. This was a problem with a lot of jobs, but with Black Mage, getting the double Firestarter proc and losing one was a super just annoying thing to have happen. It's something they eventually rectified, but yeah, definitely a super annoying thing. Enhanced Mana Ward just makes it more of your max HP. That makes it the 30% that we read earlier. And then, you know, sleep goes from single target to 5-yard radius in an AoE. Whoop-de-doo. Now, looking over at Black Mage, we have a few pretty important skills. First, we have Convert. Sacrifices HP to MP. This is only here because of Final Fantasy XI. Red Mages had Convert in Final Fantasy XIV, but it wasn't uncommon to go Black Mage sub Red Mage. It wasn't until later levels, when the level cap was increased, that you could really convert as another job because of the level that Red Mage learned it, but that's the reason that it's here in the first place. So yeah, imagine just being in a raid-wide AoE is about to come out and your Black Mage hits Convert. I saw so many Black Mages kill themselves with Convert. And keep in mind, restoring MP is super useful because it keeps you in fire phase longer. I mean, that was the primary use of it then. And it's not called Convert anymore, but that's still kind of the primary purpose of that return MP that you can have now. On top of that, it had a 3-minute cooldown. Cooldowns were so long in A Realm Reborn. Some of them still are, but there was a lot of really long cooldowns back then. Then you had Freeze, covers a designated area in ice. It was a placed ground AoE for quite some expansions with a potency of 20. Realistically, Freeze was only there as a ranged ice AoE that bound enemies. It did 20 potency. That's nothing. You never wanted to cast Freeze. It was considered a waste of a button, and you avoided it at all costs, especially with the 3.5-second cast time that it actually has. Now, Apocatastasis, I don't know. That's what we're going with. This was actually a super useful skill they had for quite some time. Increases a party member's fire, ice, and lightning resist by 30% for 12 seconds. Cannot be reused on an individual for 60 seconds when the effect wears off. Yeah, they were doing that back then. So if you had double Black Mage, you couldn't double Apoc them. Now, the big thing is a lot of damage was fire, ice, or lightning back then, but there was unaspected damage. So eventually Apoc would see a change, just, I believe, reducing magic damage taken, and it became really useful over time. I mean, if you knew when to use it, no matter what, just reducing that kind of damage was nice. It's just here it was a little too niche, and when they stopped using exactly those elements, you know, they needed to update APOC to go along with it. 2-minute cooldown, also not the worst, given that it's a defense. That's probably what it would have nowadays, you know, given if we had it still, but yeah, either way. Then Mana Wall. Mana Wall was busted. Creates a barrier that nullifies 2 physical attacks for 60 seconds. There was a lot more physical attacks in the game back then, and Mana Wall, if you use it on a physical attack and made it do 0 damage, most of the time it would eliminate the effect overall. Titan's Landslides, or physical damage. So you would not too often see a Black Mage use Mana Wall to avoid a set of landslides just so they could keep casting. I remember on turn 13, the Earthshakers, those are physical damage. Black Mages would use Mana Wall so they would take 0 damage from 2 of them. And then with a 2-minute cooldown, I mean, as long as you didn't get targeted by 2 in a row, I mean, you were one of the best targets to get targeted by that for the sake of the healers. So very, very powerful skill, just because nullifying an attack usually meant eliminating its effect way back when. And then Flare, their go-to AoE, a 4-second cast time. Now, this is and, you know, or was and still is a very, very powerful AoE ability. The big thing was combining Flare with stuff like Convert, and also using MP ticks to very creatively try to get an extra flare out. So there's a lot of like little tricks that you could do with it. But much like Freeze, a lot of people didn't like using Flare. They acknowledged that it was good, but it was really like if you had Swift Cast, you wanted to use it, because nobody wanted to sit through that 4-second cast time, even if it was one of your stronger AoE options. So the Black Mage skills themselves weren't really the important bit of Black Mage in A Realm Reborn. It really was all the Thaumaturge skills that defined the job, which is very different from the way most of the other jobs worked, even way back when. Now, cross-class actions, they had Raging Strikes, which I think was just... Oh no, Hawkeye was just Dexterity. Yeah, Raging Strikes was damage dealt, so of course you wanted that. Hawkeye was accuracy and dexterity. Now, you should have had enough accuracy in Raid, so that portion shouldn't have mattered, unless there was a boss that had some sort of evasion buff, in which case that accuracy would actually come in handy. But yeah, Raging Strike's important. Quelling Strikes, reducing your enmity, given how much damage Black Mage does. That was very important. But then Ruin Physic, you ignored those. Virus, you definitely took, even though it was the weak version of Virus, because you weren't on an Arcanist class/job, is still something that Black Mages definitely took. And Eye for an Eye, you know, putting that defensive cooldown on somebody else, or even, I don't think you could actually put it on yourself. Pretty sure that it was only an ally. But yeah, having those extra couple of tools just gave Thaumaturge and Black Mage a little bit extra of an edge. Now, by the end of A Realm Reborn, there were some changes to Thaumaturge and Black Mage, and also to the overall style of this page, because it looks a lot nicer now. In fact, it doesn't work with my cropping because it's done like a proper page. Look at this. Now we get to do some editing in the middle of the video. But either way, you know, they did go out of their way to, I believe, change potencies and maybe some MP costs at the time. You can see, for example, this is 170 instead of 150, so they bumped that up. Thunder looks to be the same. Looks like Thunder only has a duration of 12 seconds, and then Thunder 2 has a duration of 15 seconds, and then Thunder 3 has a duration of 18 seconds, because I think they did that to increase the value of Thundercloud on Thunder 3. If I recall, people might have actually Thunderclouded stuff other than Thunder 3 way back when. I'm starting to remember that being a thing, of potentially Thunderclouding Thunders 1 or 2, and I think they wanted to define Thunder 3 as, yeah, you should be Thunderclouding Thunder 3 at this point, because they weren't just upgrading skills back then. You actually had the multiple tiers of Thunders available, and it was just a little strange, to say the least. Looking at some of the other skills, there's probably some other small changes in here. If we were to look at like cast times and stuff, I'm sure some of that goes a little bit differently. I'm seeing, you know, 2 seconds, 3 seconds for Fire 3, which, you know, wasn't exactly the greatest thing, but it is what it is. Yeah, we can see the cooldown 2.5, 3 seconds, 3 seconds on, really, Thunder 2 was 3 seconds, and Thunder 3 was 3.5 seconds. You know what? I hadn't even noticed that. Yeah, 3 seconds, 3.5 seconds. Yeah, so to match the cast times being longer, they made sure that the durations also changed when they got, oh no, it's actually 15 seconds here too. Is it 12 seconds? Oh, okay, so I was blind. I had actually missed that in the earlier portion. So yeah, that wasn't a change they had made. I do recall that being a thing though, but I think that was just about the amount of MP you had available or something whenever you were trying to hard cast it at any given point in the rotation, if it was going to fall off. It's hard to remember all those little tiny details, those things that like career Black Mages and Thaumaturges really remembered. But hey, you know, other than that, not much really changed across the rest of the job. I mean, you can see Fire 3 looks like, is that a little bit of a potency bump? Yeah, another 20 potency on Blizzard 3 and Fire 3. And they did this a lot with Black Mage. Black Mage would regularly just get 10 or 20 potency on some of their spells, and that was kind of just considered their adjustment outside of some functional changes in Heavensward and Stormblood. So not that surprising to see that be the thing. This still being 3 minutes by the end of the expansion blows my mind, though. It's just insulting. Still 3 minutes on ethereal manipulation. And then going here, convert still 3 minutes. You know, freeze was 100 potency instead of 20. Yeah, much needed. People still didn't like using it. Again, that cast time was something that really kept people away, but it saw a little more use than with it being 100 potency instead. And here's APOC now being reduces a party member's magic vulnerability by 20%, reduces magic damage taken by 20%. So much more useful. However, it was also raised to a 3-minute cooldown, it would appear, and that's toxic because it definitely shouldn't be that. And then Flare, it looks like that's the same potency, same cast time every everything is all the same there, and then this is just done a little bit differently. So yeah, Realm Reborn, Black Mage kind of just stayed the same the whole time. And while you did see a decent number of Black Mages, even way back in a Realm Reborn, the job was considered the you really need to be a masochist to want to play this in hardcore content, because, you know, especially here, they didn't have a lot of movement tools. You know, that whole Scathe thing was a lot more reasonable back then, because if there was ever a lot of movement you needed, you had one Swift Cast. And did that cooldown go down? Okay, Swift Cast went down to 60 seconds, fortunately, before the end of a Realm Reborn, because that would have been awful if that didn't change. But either way, I mean, one, you know, instant cast, guaranteed instant cast a minute, you basically had to know movement was coming and try to stock up on a Thundercloud, stock up on a Firestarter, even if it meant overwriting it, because you really wanted to avoid using Scathe at any cost necessary. And yeah, it was just something you only saw from players who really knew it and really wanted to play it. Otherwise, Summoner was a lot more popular, a lot more played, just because even though it was very, you know, dot heavy, there was a lot of little intricacies to it. It was still considered something easier to play. You could still do stuff on the move. Your pet was always dealing damage, even if it could die, because it could actually be hit by AoEs back then. And it was always an uphill battle getting people to play Black Mage. Heck, I'd say it's still an uphill battle to this day. Now, that being said, a Realm Reborn Black Mage set the foundation, but it's Heavensward Black Mage that I would say really pushed it in the direction that we see it now. Astral Fire, Umbral Ice, that's cool and all, but do you know about Enochian? Let's learn. All right, here we are into the Heavensward Thaumaturge page. Now, for the most part, we have the same stuff here. You know, still need Archer, still Thaumaturge. We see a few more potency changes. You can see these are up to 180 at this point at their base potency. Now, I don't recall if Astral Fire or Umbral Ice had their percentage increases changed to compensate for this, or if this is on top of those, because that's the thing. A lot of the like little Thaumaturge and Black Mage changes, they aren't immediately obvious when you're just looking at the skills, because there are points in time where they just make changes to the jobs, and they're not documented super well. I know, for example, in the middle of Heavensward, I think I researched it to be like patch 3.2. They made it so that whole finickiness with, you know, Fire 1 and how it travels before it'll actually give you the proc, that was fixed, I think, in 3.2. And that's not going to be reflected anywhere here. It's not going to say that under the abilities description. That's just like an under the hood change that they made and is only documented in the patch notes. That being said, you know, you do have some base potency upgrades here. You still have Thunder. You even have, of course, them listing now the Thundercloud potency, the Thunderstruck potency, if you will call it that. As you can see, this goes, you know, potency of 40 for 18 seconds. So now we're seeing 18, 21, and 24 seconds for Thunders 1, 2, and 3. That was in an attempt to make it so you didn't have to manage them as intensely, and that's very important given the actual changes that they made to Black Mage across, well, the rest of the expansion. Surecast still Surecast, Sleep still Sleep, Blizzard 2 still Blizzard 2. Potency brought back down again. Whoop-de-doo. Bind for 8 seconds now, though. Whee! Scathe still Scathe. Fire 2 still Fire 2. Thunder 2 still Thunder 2. Swift Cast still a minute. Still Swift Cast. Mana Ward still Mana Ward. Fire 3 still Fire 3. Blizzard 3. Lethargy. Thunder 3. Ethereal Manipulation down to 30 seconds. Much needed change, because again, it should have never been as long as it was. But I mean, look at this. Look at how unchanged pretty much all of this is. I mean, I'm sure if we look at the traits, yeah, Thundercloud is now a 10% chance instead of a 5% chance, and Firestarter still the same, however. So, you know, like even this like really didn't change at all, because it was just what was there to change. You know, it wasn't like there was anything fundamentally wrong. People were just intimidated by the job. But if you thought you were intimidated by the job in a Realm Reborn, where, yeah, you know, it could be kind of tough, you were not mentally prepared for Black Mage. I think Heavensward Black Mage really scarred the community in terms of ever recommending somebody pick up Black Mage as a job, especially for prog, because it is the Heavensward skills that scared a lot of people away from the job for years and years to come. Now we still have Convert, still 3-minute cooldown. Freeze still pretty much here, you know, has the potency, has the bind. APOC still the magic Vul. Mana Wall, now a barrier that nullifies physical damage. So because of all those cheese moments, like with you know, mitigating damage outright in certain situations, and then taking 0 from physical damage, just removing effects overall. Instead, they made it something that only nullifies physical damage. Now, if I go back to Mana Ward, this nullifies magic damage, but I might have skipped past it. Did it nullify only magic damage back then too? I think it did. I'm pretty sure. Mana Ward, yeah, nullifies magic damage totaling. So yeah, I mean, that's a lot of the AoEs in the game, but even still, it was so weird that they gave them 1 skill for physical damage, 1 skill for magic damage. That's the kind of button bloat we had back then. It's like, you could just make one that does 1 effect and not have 2 different ones for 2 different effects. So that was really, really weird. But either way, I mean, it made you very, very defensive. So still Mana Wall here, still Flare, still 4 seconds, still 260 potency. Now they started having the damage fall off though, 10% less damage after each target hit, up to 50% reduced. That was not popular when it first happened for any of the jobs that it happened for. But that's not the thing anyone really focused on for Black Mage. It's their next several skills that you'll definitely recognize even to this day. So Ley Lines was a little, you know, it still is. Ley Lines, you just put down like a little sigil on the ground that rotates, and when you're standing in it, you get a buff. Now, back then, it was 15% spell speed. It says attack speed, but I mean, you're casting spells, so realistically, that's what it was. And I don't remember what the number is now, but that was once every 90 seconds, and it lasted 30 seconds. Very important to maximize the amount of time you spend in Ley Lines. It still is to this day. And please remember to tell your teammates the Ley Lines is only for me, because there's nothing a Black Mage hated more back then than putting a Ley Lines off to the side in hopes of not getting targeted for an attack, and then somebody else walking an attack over to them and dropping it right on the Ley Lines. That was people didn't like that, and it definitely happened a lot. But 30 seconds is a lot of time to get all that extra speed, especially given the other spells that they had. Now, Sharpcast would ensure the next fire or thunder spell would trigger additional effects. It could also do it with Scathe to trigger the double damage, but I hope that Sharpcast Scathe is not something that people regularly considered. You would basically use it either as a damage tool to guarantee, you know, the Thundercloud or the fire, but more frequently you would use it to guarantee a fire starter or Thundercloud for movement-related stuff, especially for Thunder, because getting that instant Thundercloud was something that was really, really popular to do. You'd get the Thundercloud, hold it, maybe know you could use it for an ad coming up, or just to make sure that no matter what, you had a Thundercloud ready to go. But most people would use this for movement. Nowadays, it's used for, technically you can use it for movement, but nowadays it's used a little bit more intentionally in order to increase damage in your regular rotation. However, the big thing would be Enochian. Increases magic damage by 5% and allows the casting of Blizzard 4 and Fire 4. Now, it says its duration is 30 seconds, but what it doesn't tell you is the diminishing returns effect that Enochian had. Now, it has a 60-second cooldown, but what would happen is every time you casted Blizzard 4, it would refresh Enochian. So on the surface, that sounds great. You know, it sounds like you could keep it up indefinitely, but every time you cast it, it would reduce the duration by, I think, 5 seconds. So your first one used would be 30, then it would go down to 25, then it would go down to 20, 15, and it just became like a tighter and tighter window in order to manage it with Blizzard 4. Because realistically, while Blizzard 4 did that, you didn't want to sit there spamming Blizzard 4, you wanted to be making use of Enochian to cast Fire 4, which had this massive potency of 280, but it also had all the buffs from Astral Fire. So the idea was to try to get as many Fire 4s. You still needed to use Fire 1s in order to refresh Astral Fire, because otherwise it would just wear off. And with only 10 seconds on Astral Fire, I believe, yeah, I think it still said that Astral Fire and Umbral Ice are only 10 seconds at this point. Yeah. It was a very, very tight window to make sure you got Fire 4s and Fire 1s. If you had even the slightest delay in cast, you were doomed. But if Enochian fell off and you had this just giant time window where A, you didn't have the 5% magic damage cell, and B, you didn't have access to these two skills, you were dead in the water. You were completely worthless damage-wise in regards to endgame rating. So it was essential that you master how to do a fight and keep Enochian up the entire time. And that just scared so many people away. Why would people opt into such a strict rotation and decision-making process that's fight to fight to fight to fight dependent, when they could just not do that and play something else that may have its own intricacies, but not that? And that's kind of how people still think of Black Mage today. People still think of it as the immobile, I don't want to move, I just need to keep Enochian up job, when it's not like that at all anymore. And it was born from this version of Enochian, and it just hasn't escaped it since. Now, for cross-class actions, still largely the same. These have had some minor changes since then, but functionally still mostly the same. And then we go to the end of Heavensward. where again we can just kind of take a quick peek to see if there are any major changes that we noticed. You know, I'm seeing Surecast, 30 seconds. Sleep is still there. Blizzard 2 is still there. Scathed, Fire 2, Thunder 2, Swiftcast, still a minute, Mana Ward, 15% magic damage. I wonder if that's just not reflecting the trait. Yeah, now, and this page is just not reflecting the trait for that right now. Fire 3, still Fire 3, Blizzard 3, still Blizzard 3. This is just how it would go, man. This is just how Black Mage would go. You'd maybe see some changes, or it'd be really difficult to recognize any changes that happen. And again, all I know for certain is that somewhere in the middle of 3.x, and again, I think it's 3.2, they just made it so that your Astral Fire and Umbral Ice oh, actually, there is a major change. 12 seconds. Now, an extra few seconds on Astral Fire and Umbral Ice. I don't know which patch that was in, but that was, before the end of Heavensward, they had increased the amount of time for that. And then they had also done that fix where the travel time of fire wasn't something that would grief you in regards to refreshing Astral Fire. So it made refreshing it and managing it that much easier to do. Then on top of that with Black Mage, to see if there's anything else, still Convert, still Freeze, still APOC, still, oh my God, yeah, oh no, it was still 3 minutes. I'd forgotten, my bad. Flare, still Flare, Ley Lines, still, 15 seconds, still Enochian, still 30, yeah, everything else is still exactly the same. This is what happened, man. This is why I was like, how long is this video even going to be? Because after I explain the job, that's what it's going to do. And I guess there's not much else for me to say, except now we're going into Stormblood, and there are some significant changes there, but Black Mage is still going to be Black Mage, so let me show you what I mean. All right, and here we go into Stormblood. We get to use the job guide page now, which, nothing against console gamers, but I definitely prefer the layout of the job guide page. And fortunately, it also gives us our adjustments from the 4.0 versions of these skills, so it makes it a lot easier for the sake of the video. Blizzard, there's the heavy effects going away. It was indeed Stormblood and not Shadowbringers, but, had to go away at some point. It also got an extra second on Astral Fire and Umbral Ice. That's going to be reflected on pretty much all the Fire and Ice spells going forward, so keep an eye out for that. MP cost on Fire 1 being reduced, not that big of a deal because you really were casting Fire 4s most of the time at the higher levels. That was kind of the whole point of Enochian, but it didn't hurt. It made those Fire 4 phases where you have to stop and cast a Fire 1. It just made them a little smoother. I think it made it easier to have enough MP to cast Blizzard 3. Because that's something I kind of skirted over, is that if you went into Fire phase with not enough MP and you did the same amount of spells, but you didn't actually pay attention to how much MP you were going to have at the end of it, you could run into a situation where you didn't have enough MP for Blizzard 3, and then you had to transpose, and people would just not even realize and just wonder what's wrong, and then everything would fall apart. So yeah, MP ticks were and still are kind of an annoying thing about Black Mage because they're on a set timer, and it's the game's internal tick system. So every single time you interact with it, it's a little bit different. But it's come a long way from the way it was, but it is still something that it can be an annoyance for a lot of people. Anyway, there's the 13-second timers. Thunder 1, Transpose, Sleep, all unchanged. Blizzard 2 just exclusive to Thaumaturge and Black Mage because cross class was gone. Fire 2 had its potency reduced. I don't remember if that's because they equalized. So at one point, physical abilities and magical spells had different scaling against enemies. So 100 magic potency was worth more than 100 physical potency just because of the way the calculations worked. Stormblood might have been when they fixed that, and so there might be a few other potency reductions across the rest of this page. But I don't remember for certain. I'd have to go out of my way and look it up, but that's very likely what was happening. Another big change, Thunder 2, now instead of being just a better Thunder 1, it's an AoE Thunder ability. So now for AoE packs, you have Thunder 2 and eventually Thunder 4. And for single target, you had Thunder 1, which would eventually upgrade to Thunder 3. They also changed the level of it, but other than that, it was just if you were in an AoE pack, you would do the AoE Thunder instead of a single target one. Nothing too fancy. It had a lower chance to proc the Thundercloud buff or the Thunderstruck buff or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I mean, other than that, just a pretty simple implementation. Now, Mana Wall was removed in Stormblood, so they made Mana Ward just 30% of your max HP for 20 seconds and with a 2-minute cooldown. No surprises there. I mean, like I said before, it was super redundant way back when, and I knew they made this change eventually, just not when. Convert's still here, still unchanged. They really didn't change that till Shadowbringers, did they? Wow, that is toxic as far as I'm concerned. Fire 3, all that changed: Astral Fire, Freeze, Umbral Ice change. Blizzard 3 was just moved into being a quest reward, but other than that, it didn't functionally change at all. Thunder 3, now an upgrade of Thunder 1, now a quest reward. They also reduced its cast time because it was an upgrade from Thunder 1. There was no reason for it to have that super long cast time anymore. So, yeah, that's just it. Now it's just a higher level version of Thunder 1, and that's perfectly fine. Ethereal Manipulation just made it so it was less clunky after you did the little zoom in. Then, you know, you just weren't locked down for as long. Now, Flare was a lot more usable, but they also decided to make the damage fall off like super severe because of how much more usable it was. It was pretty dang annoying. I'm not gonna lie. It's a lot of people were not happy about all of these like damage reductions that were going on across, you know, Flare and a bunch of other skills for the other jobs as well. Ley line's still the same. Oh, wow, scrolled really far on that one. Sharpcast duration being longer just made it a little bit more usable in more situations. I think that helped the opener, if I'm not mistaken, a little bit more. I think you could actually ensure that you had it for the Fire 1 cast. Or did you use that? I don't remember much about the Stormblood opener for Black Mage, but yeah, that might have been what they did for Sharpcast. All the same, the duration increase just kept improving usability for it overall. Enochian, probably the biggest change. No longer this dance about like balancing the duration of it and having to Blizzard 4 to refresh it. Instead, it was just you pressed it, and as long as you didn't lose Astral Fire or lose Umbral Ice, then you were good. That was it. You didn't have to worry about anything at all. People were still intimidated, though. That didn't really change people's, I guess, interpretation of the difficulty of Black Mage, even though you didn't really have to manage it nearly as much. Just don't lose those buffs and you're okay. It also has the Polyglot effect, but that won't matter until we talk about their level 70 ability. Blizzard 4 reduced the cast time of Blizzard 4 and Fire 4. They just didn't serve exactly the same purposes. So to make them, again, more usable, they brought that cast time down, even if they did also bring the potency down along with it. But the big thing was the introduction of the Umbral Hearts effect for Blizzard 4, which would nullify the MP cost increase effect of Astral Fire. It wouldn't make them 0 MP, wouldn't make your fire skill 0 MP, it just reduces the actual increase in the cost that comes from being an Astral Fire. But more importantly, it reduced the MP cost of Flare by 1/3. So now that was way more usable as well in AoE situations. Still, again, the fall off damage wasn't popular, but Flare being more usable made doing AoE packs after you got it, after you got Blizzard 4, just a lot better. So people like that. Fire 4, not much to say here. Again, I'm not sure how much of this potency change is because of them reducing the cast time or because they were doing that equalization that I feel like that happened in Shadowbringers. I don't think it happened in Stormblood, but again, I can't remember for certain. Then we get into the new abilities. Between the Lines, move instantly to the center of your ley lines if they are down. Great skill. So not only great in case you need to move out of your ley lines, but you could deliberately use your ley lines as sort of a beacon for mechanics. Like if you know you're going to have to dodge away from where you lay your ley lines down, but then you can go back to that spot, whether or not you have to go back to that spot or you just can choose to. It's just so nice to have this instant zip around the map, so you don't have to worry too much about interrupting your cast and running around and trying to manage swift cast and the triple cast skill that's a few further down. Big win, and still a skill that I love to this day. Thunder 4, just an upgraded Thunder 2. Nothing fancy to say about that. Triple cast, next 3 spells, instant cast. Now, what's interesting about triple cast is that because of the cast time of Fire 4 being a little bit longer than the GCD, triple cast is a DPS increase to just use it, even if you don't need it for movement. So what has always kind of happened since its incorporation is people will use it because they like Google the rotation, you know, oh, here's the Black Mage opener, whatever, and they wouldn't learn the fight and learn to hold triple cast for certain mechanics, and that's where you would really see a big skill gap between a Black Mage who was trying to learn it or just didn't understand it entirely and an experienced Black Mage. So it was a very big defining factor, being able to just not press triple cast whenever it was available just for your Fire Force for more damage. And then Foul. This was the mechanic that uses the Polyglot. So basically every 30 seconds you're in Enochian, you generate a Polyglot, and that lets you use Foul. And it's just massive AoE damage, you know, and so you would use it. It has a cast time, you know, 2.5 seconds, but it's a lot of damage. Not to mention you could do fun stuff like, you know, get a polyglot stack and then spend the foul right before you get another one so that you could, you know, double stack fouls, like 2 of them back to back with like a really well-timed cast. And you could just pump a ton of damage into a specific damage frame, into a certain DPS window. And yeah, it's just something that, something else that you could do. Something you can still do to this day. We just have more polyglot stacks now and more uses for it. But was a very well liked final skill. Looks really cool. Dealt a ton of damage, even if it didn't benefit from Astral Fire. And I think that might have been a balance problem at some point, comparing the fully Astral Fired Fire 4 to a foul cast. But I don't remember exactly how it went. And of course, they removed Surecast, Swiftcast, APOC, Lethargy, and they didn't even call it Mana Wall. They just called it Wall. Didn't remember them doing that. Yeah, APOC being gone was probably the biggest disappointment. I think it's because it's added to the roll actions just below. I know Surecast and Swiftcast are certainly down there, and I think Lethargy is down there in some capacity as well. Yeah, because Break is kind of like it, but, you know, not really. You know, you have Addle instead of Virus, Drain, which is not very good at all. Diversion for Enmity generation, Lucid Dreaming for Enmity because the refresh was, I think there's like really particular like way you could use Lucid Dreaming to like get an extra MP tech. I don't remember what it was, but I remember there being some like really big brain like Black Mage tech for Lucid Dreaming that barely resulted in a gain, but I remember some people talking about. Swiftcast still there. Now, funny thing, Mana Shift. You could transfer 20% of your own mana to a target party member. On paper, Black Mage sounds like the best target for, or the best user of that, right? Because they have infinite mana. You know, they don't actually run out of mana as in like the way other jobs do. If they are at 0 mana, they'll just bring themselves up to 10,000 mana. But Black Mage just never wanted to use it because they're like, that's going to slow down my fire phase, and I really don't want to do that. So yeah, I'm not going to give you the mana. And you know what? I can't really blame them for that. APOC was made into a roll action, and Surecast is here as well. Nullifies knockback and draw-in effects, and that is very, very important because at this point, Surecast would make it so that if you actually casted a spell, it would cancel Surecast effects. So if you wanted to nullify a knockback or draw-in, you also had to not be casting a spell during the time that it happened. But however, nowadays, you know, we have the fully functioning Surecast, and this is just the precursor to it. So it's just funny to remember that that's how it worked. And then Erase, remove a damage over time effect from an ally with a restore their potency, restore their health for 200 potency. It was awful. Almost nobody used it. Even if they could have used it, most people just chose not to use it. And then for their traits being upgraded, you know, Thundercloud, Thunder Force affected by it. Enhanced intelligence, you know, there's more intelligence, and then now also allows for stacking of a third Astral Fire, Umbral Ice, which reduces the cast time for spells of the opposite element by half. Very important because it makes switching between the phases much, much faster, so that was very important to have. Firestarter, just a couple levels earlier. Thunder Mastery, the upgrade, you know, that's all the new traits are just upgrades, upgrades, upgrades. Enhanced Umbral Hearts, this is what gave the flare effect to Umbral Hearts. It doesn't start with that when you first get Blizzard 4. It doesn't happen until level 68. And then Enhanced Enochian is the polyglot effect, and also makes Enochian's magic damage increase 10%, which just a free 5% extra damage when you hit level 70. Ain't nobody gonna say no to that. Now, very briefly, we can look at the end of Stormblood as well. For some reason, this page was having like issues loading when I was doing it before, and I don't recall there being almost any changes to Black Mage across all of Stormblood. Actually, I did write a few down. The increased Thundercloud's duration and reduced Ethereal Manipulation's recast. So here, Ethereal Manipulation, if we go down to level 50, is still 30 seconds. By the end of the expansion, Ethereal Manipulation was 10 seconds. And that's how people know it for nowadays. They also reduced the delay of Ethereal Manipulation, that like lock. They reduced that again in 4.3, and they constantly kept buffing up Fire 4 in order to, well, increase the damage they were dealing because they weren't dealing enough damage. So they brought it from 280 down to 260, and then brought it back up to 280 in a patch, and then up to 300 before the end of the expansion. And then also, again, yeah, Thundercloud's duration was another thing, like I said, that went up. It now lasted 18 seconds here, and again, I don't know why all the thumbnails aren't working, but Wayback Machine sometimes just does stuff like that, whereas at the start of the expansion it only lasted 12 seconds. And that's pretty much is all the changes that they made. They just kept pumping up damage onto Fire 4. I don't think they made any other major changes between the two. Like, I don't think Foul, for example, and its damage reduction changed, or Flare had its damage fall off changed across the entire expansion. I think I could just check those things real quick because those would be the big things. Yeah, still 70% less here. So I mean, Black Mage just didn't get much changes throughout Stormblood, and people still struggled with it. I mean, it's just weird because Black Mage was always doing well when a good player was playing it, but most people were afraid to play it, so it just kind of sat in the spot where almost nobody played it, and if you did play it, you were just a god. And there was no other ifs, ands, or buts about it. So that's just how the job turned out at this point. Either way, it's a job that's always commanded a lot of respect, and that would continue into Shadowbringers, where the respect would reach a new level because Shadowbringers would take the already now becoming more mobile Black Mage, give it that one last extra push that it needed, and push it into something that, heck, even I started taking it into Ultimates and Savages and learning it because the job was just so fun and I'd waited so long to not feel intimidated by it. And you know what? That's what Shadowbringers Black Mage encapsulates, so let's get to it. And here we are. It's like we're on the same page again, right? It's like we never even left. So here we go. We have all the revisions that were made, fortunately, again, but we are looking at the 5.0 version. Unfortunately, the revisions don't appear to be working. I can try to reload the page real quick, and you guys can you can sit here for that. Hopefully it doesn't break, because the Wayback Machine, again, is a little bit finicky at times, and I'm getting a little worried looking at this page right now. It also forced me all the way to the bottom of the page, weirdly enough. There we go. Yeah, it just wasn't even showing me the hover over right here. Here's the big change. Yeah, Astral Fire and Umbral Ice up to 15 seconds at this point. Again, just trying to improve usability. They also really needed to make room because they were adding more spells that you could use. You'll see which ones later on, but they needed to give it that increase to make sure you had enough time to do other things. But this also opened up the ability to do the no Fire 1 rotations, where with enough spell speed, you could just spam Fire Force, then go back to Ice, spam Fire Force, go back to Ice, and then just make sure that you were refreshing your Thunders whenever you were in Ice. And that was just what your ultimate goal would be. Transpose recast time reduced to 5 seconds. Now, I've kind of been ignoring transpose this whole time because, like I said, it was kind of an early level player bait where people learned to swap phases with it, and then Fire 3 and Blizzard 3 were supposed to kind of replace it. But transpose does have a lot of specific tech that you can use, and it's actually gained more techniques that, you know, high skill players can use in certain situations to ensure that they don't lose damage or they can improve their mobility and stuff like that. And one of the big things is having a fire starter proc that you got at the end of a fire phase, especially prevalent prior to them making it so you got the fire starter proc immediately, so it was somewhat feasible to use it immediately as well. Basically, you could hold a fire starter proc until your next fire phase, and then instead of using it, for example, to turn back into fire, you could transpose so you had the Astral Fire 1 buff, and then use the fire starter proc to go up to Fire 3. So you get your transition between Blizzard to Ice was a little bit stronger. And then, of course, you could just use it to maintain your actual buffs between phases. You know, if there was downtime, you didn't want to just not have Astral Fire or Umbral Ice, especially with Enochian having the Polyglot effect. However, in Shadowbringers, it became much less of a thing. Still a bit of tech involved and still very useful because of the new skill that was added. But you saw less and less of those niche cases of using it as a part of your rotation. Now, Thunder, Sleep, largely the same. Blizzard 2, the Bind effect was removed at this point, and then, of course, the Umbral Ice upgrade. Fire 2, the Astral Fire upgrade. Mana Font finally converts gone. It's Mana Font now, just restores max MP, doesn't sacrifice HP, 3-minute cooldown, very long cooldown, but all the same, much more usable skill. Fire 3 is just the Astral Fire upgrade. Freeze. Now, the big thing with Freeze is now it wasn't a placed AoE, it was just around the target. It was basically your go-to. I think Freeze becomes your like Blizzard 4 yeah, it became your Blizzard 4 equivalent when AoEing, and it would even grant you an Umbral Heart. And with the Umbral Heart, you know, you would obviously reduce the flare cost by 1/3. So now essentially you could Blizzard, I think, could you Blizzard 2 at this point? Was Blizzard 2 upgraded? No, I don't think it was. No, yeah, so that's one expansion too far behind. You could Blizzard 3 into Freeze, and then Fire 3 into Flare, and you could go back and forth with those as opposed to using Fire 2 and Blizzard 2, which was really, really awkward, but then became a point where people were just freeze spamming at the early levels before you got the Umbral Heart, because I think that comes from a trait later on, very similar to the Umbral Hearts in Stormblood. So yeah, Freeze became your like go-to AoE spell for like a really, really long time in Shadowbringers. But it after basically being unused for several expansions, kind of a nice thing. Then, you know, Blizzard 3 is still just the cost, or just the Umbral Ice timing. Thunder 3 the same, Ethereal Manipulation the same, Flare, the potency reduction change, you know, they just changed. It's now 40% for all enemies. It doesn't have all that like different scaling and stuff, so much more usable as well. Leyline's still here. Sharpcast now recast only 30 seconds, so it was used far more. Basically every fire rotation approximately you could use it, maybe a little bit less than that. I don't remember the exact length of time, but about that. You know, it may be a little bit different depending on your spell speed and whatnot. Enochian, 15% magic damage, now also affects the new spell Despair and Umbral Soul, which is very important, and Polyglot stacks increase to 2. You used it for Foul before, but there is another skill that you can use it on in Shadowbringers. Now, Blizzard 4, potency increased to 300, cool, nothing wrong with that. Fire 4, also 300, so they just brought it up to that. All of these other skills that they introduced, still exactly the same. Foul, Between the Lines, Thunder 4, Triple Cast, all the Stormblood skills, unchanged. New skills, though, Despair. Despair is basically like a single target flare. It's supposed to be the last spell that you cast during an Astral Fire phase. And as such, you wanted to just make sure, if you know, it was 3 Fire 4s, Fire 1, 3 Fire 4s, Despair, and then you would go over back into Ice. But however, it would bring your MP down to 0, much like what's it called? Flare would. So what would end up happening is, you know, on the surface with the way it's worked up to this point, that would screw you. But what ends up happening is you get a trait that makes it so that you can cast Blizzard 3 when you have no MP. And this became a huge point of contention between high-level Black Mage and low-level Black Mage. We'll talk about that in a sec. Another very useful skill, Umbral Soul, basically your downtime tool. When you're in Ice, you can press this. It'll give you another stack of Umbral Ice, and it'll give you an Umbral Heart. So essentially, if you went into a downtime phase in Fire, you would transpose to Ice and then spam Umbral Soul. You would do that between dungeon packs. You would do that during boss downtime. Very, very powerful tool that you really wanted to make sure you were pressing super often during those types of phases. And Xenoglossy, instant cast, single target version of Foul. And that was awesome. Very satisfying skill to use, very strong, even more mobility, even more burst, as long as you were timing it during the right sections of the boss. And no one complained about that. Black Mage was just even better now, especially after, you know, I still have roll actions here. We have Swift Cast, Lucid Dreaming, and Sure Cast, and Addle being good. But when we go down to the traits and we see, you know, Enhanced Freeze at 68, now Freeze gets the Umbral Hearts alongside of the Enhanced Umbral Arts that Blizzard 4 was getting at 68, which is again why Freeze was basically the only AoE most people used until the higher levels. Then you have Aspect Mastery. Now at level 72, makes so that swapping with a spell will consume no MP. So Fire 3 to get into Astral Fire from Umbral Ice, 0 MP, and Blizzard 3 to get into Umbral Ice from Astral Fire, 0 MP. The problem was when you got synced below level 72, because it was a horrible experience ever getting synced under level 72. And it just made going back and especially doing stuff like, you know, ultimates from Stormblood, you know, the expansion that introduced them that had 2 of them, it felt really bad not having Aspect Mastery. So yeah, that definitely wasn't loved a lot. This is Enhanced Surecast. This is what brought it from 60 to 30. We went over that before. Same with Enochian for the 15%, and the second Polyglot stack here, which just meant even more mobility, even more burst, and even more awesomeness. And again, that really didn't change throughout much of Shadowbringers. They didn't see much in the way of change. I mean, I'm sure there's like potency changes and stuff in here, but you can see 15 seconds. You can see the potencies largely being the same. Thunder, Sleep, Blizzard 2. It's just like, what was the point in changing any of this stuff? It all worked. It all made sense. It was all strong. And Black Mage performed pretty well throughout the entirety of the expansion. There's got to be a change in here somewhere, but without really looking at every single aspect, it's kind of hard to point them out, notice them. Maybe something like, where is it? Like Mana Font? No, still 3 minutes on Mana Font. So yeah, definitely not that. Sharpcast, 30 seconds, 15-second duration. Yeah, 15 seconds. Polyglot, all this stuff. I mean, it's all here. It's all the same potencies. It's all the same costs. It's all the same everything. Between the Lines, 3 seconds, Thunder 4, Triple Cast. I think at one point they made it so that Triple Cast, I think when you first got triple cast, it didn't have the buff that said 3, 2, and 1 to tell you how many instant casts you had left. I think they did do that at some point in Shadowbringers, like really early on, but that wouldn't be reflected here. So again, that's kind of hard to talk about. I mean, Foul is still here, Despair is still here, Umbral Soul, like it's all here, and it's all as strong as it was when the expansion started. So there's not really much to talk about for Shadowbringers other than this is when Black Mage was considered complete. And once a job feels complete in Final Fantasy XIV, a fear sets in. What are they going to do next expansion? Are they going to ruin it? How are they even going to add to it? It's perfect to play right now. What do I do? Well, fortunately, with Shadowbringers going to Endwalker, they got it right one more time. And now that fear is just extended to 7.0. So let's take a quick look at the Endwalker stuff for Black Mage. All right, and here we go. Again, most of the stuff is exactly the same. And also it's, you know, on the live servers now. So it's not like you need me to tell you how this stuff works. The big difference is Blizzard 2 no longer being a point blank AoE. It is a targeted AoE. And their AoE is probably one of the bigger things that changed because now the idea was that you would do Blizzard 2. Like Blizzard 2 and Fire 2 became the AoE equivalents of Blizzard 3 and Fire 3. So now the idea was to do Blizzard 2 freeze, Fire 2 flares, you know, and to burn through your MP with the flares. And that's the idea. One thing I kind of skipped over was what was called cold flares, where essentially you'd go into ice and then cast flare, and then go into ice and then cast flare. And you would just do that to make the flares really quick and to just constantly burn through the MP and go back and forth between the two phases. That was really good on really high amounts of targets. But now with Blizzard 2 and Fire 2 being AoE equivalents, you really, as far as I know, you don't really see that much anymore. You just see Blizzard 2 freeze, Fire 2 flare, flare, Blizzard 2. And then if you want to use Mana Font, you know, or triple cast, you know, obviously that changes things a little bit. Man, remembering way back, before people really were committed to the idea of using stat potions for everything, wasn't uncommon to bring a mana potion and ether and do an extra flare on AoE packs. That wasn't an uncommon thing. You would use one, and then you would convert, and then you would do another, and then you would ether, and then you would do another. That was pretty common back in the days, but now this is just super streamlined for the AoE right here. Thunder 2, still pretty much the same. Mana Ward, the same. Mana Font, only 2 minutes. You know, 2-minute meta. Can't have that being 3 minutes anymore. So, you know, I think everyone's not surprised by that. Potency being 120 on freeze. I do believe that is a small buff from how it was before. Ethereal Manipulation, Flare, you know, 40%. Enhanced Flare, right. Enhanced Flare was a thing. Enhanced Flare wasn't a thing in the previous expansion, was it? Why is it bugging out when I'm trying to check this? Enhanced Flare. Yeah, Enhanced Flare is something they added in Endwalker. I'd forgotten about Enhanced Flare. That'll be in a trait later, so we'll get to that in a little bit. Ley lines, now 2 minutes. Now keep in mind I'm looking at the current version of the page. Ley lines was 90 seconds earlier in the expansion, and people were like, why? And then they eventually just made it 2 minutes and balanced it around the 2-minute meta. So that's why it is 2 minutes in the page that we're looking at right now. Sharp cast, duration 30 seconds, cooldown 30 seconds, 2 charges. It's used a lot in the rotation. Now you can still use it for instant cast if you really want to, but it's used in a far more standard manner now because it's just so available. It doesn't really need to be held unless you need to for something very specific. Then Blizzard 4 and Fire 4, small potency buffs, nothing major there. Or at least the number's higher. Endwalker's calculations are different, but all the same. You know, it's just I'm acknowledging the number is different. That is all. Thunder 4, triple cast, having 2 charges in Endwalker. That sure is pleasant. Foul, you know, Foul being instant cast. I believe this is a trait. I don't even think that's is that a level 80 trait? I actually want to skip ahead and check because I don't think that is something you wait for at 90. Yeah. Enhanced Foul is at level 80. So that was something new that they got right at level 80, which was nice. But still level 70 has a cast time. Boohoo. It had that before, but now at level 80, it was instant cast. Despair, still functionally the same. Umbral Soul, still functionally the same. Xenoglossy, functionally the same. High Fire 2 and High Blizzard 2, just upgrading Fire 2 and Blizzard 2. You know, they were already something that you were gonna, you know, you were using them for a certain effect, but now is here where you get the enhanced effect. The enhanced flare is canceled if Astral Fire ends. So, yeah, this, I think you did like, I think what you do now is you do 2 High Fire 2s is what you do. And then you do 2 flares, and then you go back with Blizzard, and then I don't know if that's what you actually do, if that's optimal, but I think that's what was intended at the very least, because I think you can have 2 stacks of enhanced flare. I'll have to double check if it's what it says in the traits, but at the very least that might have been during the media tour. I really need to get on Black Mage again, because I love Black Mage, but I haven't played it that much this expansion. Amplifier, grant a single stack of Polyglot on a 2-minute just to free Xenoglossy during your 2-minute buffs. And if you have them tucked away, that's basically 3 of them. Insane. And then Paradox, which was a very interesting skill when they introduced it. So basically it replaces Fire and Blizzard 1. And you can use it once per Astral Fire or Umbral Ice phase. And Astral Fire, it's just a stronger fire. There's nothing else that it does. However, if you're in Umbral Ice, its instant cast requires no MP and refreshes Umbral Ice. So a fantastic movement ability. So much so that if you desperately need movement, Transpose Paradox is not something that is considered a bad thing to do. You want to avoid that if you can, but the fact that that's viable, I mean, that's just another means of skill expression. Not to mention it would still proc Firestarter if you did the fire related one, and it just made that Fire 1 cast that wee bit stronger than it otherwise would be. Paradox was so strong that at one point there was a meme Paradox rotation where all you did essentially was Paradox, if I recall. Like you literally would like Paradox, Blizzard 3, Paradox, Fire 3, Paradox. And I remember it like not being very good, but I think there was like one case where somebody did really well with it and uploaded it to the internet. And everyone was like, oh man, they messed this up so bad. And then all the Black Mage players were like, I'm not doing that. There's not a chance that I'm doing that. And I don't think anyone can really blame them for that. Sleep, being a roll action, that's here. And then Aspect Mastery, this was the biggest change. Aspect Mastery being level 1. Was by and far the most important thing that happened, because it was so dumb going down below level 72 and it just being awful. So that was such a welcome change to Black Mage and Endwalker. And then they also just doubled it into making, 1 stack Astral Fire, Umbral Ice, 2 stacks, and then eventually 3 stacks. Casting Fire 2 or Blizzard 2, this is also the level where that would start working for swapping between Astral Fire and Umbral Ice. And then the cast times of the opposite spell. Yeah, I mean, it just worked in a little bit of new stuff, a little bit of old stuff, and made it work a-okay. 40% on Firestarter. I wonder when it became 40%, because I actually haven't been paying attention to that. It was 40% in Shadowbringers. It was 40% at the start of Shadowbringers. That's what I want to say. Where is it? It was at the start. Okay, because that's a change that I missed, and I want to make sure that we're going back over the old skills. It was 40% at the end of Stormblood. Okay, I just wasn't okay. So it looks like Stormblood is the answer, because I'm almost certain that Firestarter was not 40% at the end of Heavensward, going all the way back through everything that we've been through today. No, it was 40% there too. Okay, hold on, wait a minute. How did 30%? So it was all the way in Heavensward. I missed that ages ago. So it's been that way for a hot minute. I just kind of take Firestarter for granted. It's not as interactive as it was during A Realm Reborn. So my brain didn't quite keep that up to pace. The enhanced Enochians, the sharp cast going down to 30%, the magic damage 15%, the second Polyglot, the instant cast Foul, the high Blizzard and high Fire 2. Mana Font being 2 minutes is at level 84. That's toxic. Enochian magic damage to 21%. I don't know why they went 21. It's so weird. The second set of sharp casts, and then Paradox right here. And then there you go. And that's all the Black Mage skills throughout all of the expansions. And as you can see, it really doesn't change that much. Like, yeah, it gets updates, it gets new things, a few new things get reworked, potencies get changed, it gets a few more instant casts, or things get their cast times. But you can see that its identity has remained entirely the same. And because it's been that way for so long, everyone is afraid every expansion now that they're just going to decide, oh, you know what, we'll rework it because we can't do anything interesting with it anymore. And you know what? I understand that fear. I thought that was going to happen in 6.0. I'm afraid it's going to happen in 7.0. But I feel like they would already know that, and they wouldn't have only told us about Dragoon and Astro getting major 7.0 changes. But you never know. You just never know. And I don't think it needs to change. I don't know how they can update it any further, but I don't think it needs to change. And I'm really hoping that it doesn't go through anything major that messes with how people feel about it. But anyway, that's going to be a wrap for our retro view of all the Black Mage skills in Final Fantasy XIV across all the expansions. It's getting late for me, so that's why I've been kind of bringing my voice down a little bit. So I'm going to wrap this recording up and get to bed, I suppose. But be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share. Check out all the other retro videos in the playlist if you haven't yet. And with that, I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care.